They laughed when he showed up with nothing but calloused hands and an old pair of boots. At Griggs Ranch, legends weren't made, they were broken. The crowd gathered for the show a wild stallion no one could touch, not even with a whip. Then came the dare. If you can lay a hand on that beast, the ranch owners sneered, the land is yours. They expected a fool's failure. But the war-hardened stranger didn't raise his voice. He just stepped forward, and the monster of the pen bowed its head. What came next would shake the dust off old lies, awaken a forgotten past, and plant the first seed of redemption on broken ground. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The Texas sun was a merciless tyrant that June afternoon, beating down on the red dirt behind Griggs Ranch until the earth shimmered and cracked. Dust floated in the slanted light, catching on faded banners that snapped along the rusted railings. El Paso County Rodeo, try and ride the beast. The tang of sweat manure and sunburnt hay thickened the air, swirling with the distant aroma of funnel cakes and grilled corn. From the old speakers bolted to the fence posts, an overenthusiastic announcer bellowed, "Coming up next, folks, the horse they call the Hoofed Devil, undefeated and unbroken, our very own Valor." The crowd pressed in close to the ring. Locals in battered straw hats and sunburnt jeans rubbed elbows with tourists snapping photos. A handful of TikTokers hovered by the rails, their phones poised for the next disaster to go viral. Near the dusty lot, the old ranch hands whispered warnings and bets. No one noticed the stranger who slipped in through the side gate, pushing a battered bicycle and carrying nothing but a faded duffel. He paused, leaning the bike against a fence post, surveying the scene beneath the low brim of a sweat-stained cap. His boots were army issue, cracked and mended. His jacket had lost any hint of original color. He looked in every way like a man who'd forgotten the taste of belonging. He made his way to the horse stalls, not toward the stands. One of the younger hands squinted at him, suspicion sharp in his eyes. "We don't take in drifters here, buddy. No truck, no ID, no pay stubs, move along." The stranger's voice was low, quiet, almost gentle. "Heard you needed someone to clean up the feed sheds. I work for a meal." Before the boy could protest, an older man, his hair silver beneath a battered cap, stepped forward. Frank Delaney's stable boss, for as long as anyone remembered, looked the stranger up and down. He studied the hands, the posture, the scars, in quiet. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "Let him in, Ethan. He ain't here to watch the show. He's here to work." The stranger, Jack Maddox, though no one asked his name, nodded his thanks and melted into the shadows beside the stables. But it wasn't the call of labor that kept his gaze drifting to the corral. It was the name Valor echoing through the arena speakers. Inside the ring, the ground shook with anticipation. Two burly wranglers struggled to keep a massive gray-black stallion at bay. Valor's flanks rippled with muscle and old scars. His mane flew wild, his eyes flashing with a heat that seemed almost feverish. Hooves slammed against the steel rail, sending shudders through the crowd. 14 riders, 14 thrown, the announcer called out, half proud, half afraid. "Who's got the guts to try next?" in the crowd, someone yelled. "That horse nearly killed the last one." "War ruined him," another muttered. The mood was hungry for blood, or maybe just for something they hadn't seen before. Above it all, in a shaded VIP stand, sat Charles Griggs, broad-shouldered, cowboy-hatted a man who wore his power like a second skin. He leaned forward, boots propped on the rail, eyes glittering with amusement. "Hell, I'll give this whole damn ranch to anyone who can lay a hand on that beast." He boomed, his voice rolling over the crowd like thunder. People roared with laughter. Camera phones rose up, catching every word. Mila Griggs, his daughter hair tied back, live streaming from the stands, caught her father's eye and frowned, sensing the challenge meant more than a joke. For a moment, the only movement was the swirl of dust and the steady, thunderous breath of valor pacing the perimeter unbroken. Then Jack stepped forward, no rope, no gloves, no spurs. He unrolled his sleeves, set his old army duffel aside, and walked through the creaking gate and onto the sun-baked arena sand. Frank lunged, grabbing at Jack's arm. "Son, you'll get trampled. That thing's not for riding. Hell, you can't even get close." Jack barely glanced back. "He's not wild," he said softly. "He's just lost." The crowd started to heckle, but Jack didn't hear them. He tuned out the sun and the stairs, the stench and the noise, everything but the animal before him. Valor stamped and blue eyes rolling head-tossing with warning. Jack stopped 3 meters short, palms, open arms loose at his side. His voice, barely more than a whisper, floated across the silence. "Easy, soldier. It's all right. You remember, don't you?" The horse stilled nostrils, flaring muscles coiled tight as wire. Jack didn't move, didn't blink. He simply breathed, letting the memory in his bones carry the message. One slow step forward, a twitch of an ear, a shift in stance. Jack knelt in the dust, head-lowered, hands extended in open invitation, not to command, but to ask. The crowd went dead, silent, breathless. Valor's wild gaze darted from man to mob, and back again, something ancient flickering behind the whites of his eyes. And then a movement, almost too subtle to catch, of the stallion lowered his head, letting the tip of his nose hover over Jack's waiting hands. Jack reached up, brushing his fingertips against Valor's cheek. The world seemed to freeze. Mila gasped, dropping her phone to the grass. The stream kept running, catching nothing but her shocked expression. For a heartbeat, it was as if no one dared breathe. Frank blinked tears away. He didn't know he had. Griggs, frozen above, let his smile slip. Jack stood, pressing his forehead to the horses. In a voice only Valor could hear, he whispered, "You're home now." For a long moment after Valor lowered his head to Jack's outstretched hand, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Even the hot Texas wind dropped, as if refusing to interrupt the silence that had fallen like a blanket over the rodeo grounds. Phones and cameras, hundreds of them, zoomed in and caught the impossible, the moment when the hoofed devil bowed not to a whip, but to the gentle words of a stranger. Mila Griggs, her heart hammering in her chest, stared at the frozen frame on her phone before quickly refocusing and hitting post. She typed, "This just happened. No one's ever touched Valor before." Within seconds, the likes and shocked comments started piling up, the digital world colliding with the stunned disbelief that hung in the air. Frank Delaney, still gripping the fence with white-knuckled hands, muttered so only the men nearest could hear, "I ain't never seen anything like that." His voice trembled, equal parts awe and dread. Somewhere in the crowd, an old rancher whispered voice, hoarse with age and memory. "That man's not just a rider. He's a whisperer." Mila's hands shook as she tried to steady her phone for another angle. All around her, the crowd was coming alive again, murmuring eyes darting from Jack to the enormous stallion, who now stood as calm as midnight rain. From the VIP box, Charles Griggs's laughter faltered. He forced his jaw tight, but there was a flicker of something, fear or maybe respect, buried in his gaze as he pushed his way down the steps and into the ring. His boots hit the sand with the weight of a man who refused to show weakness. The rodeo announcer, caught between showmanship and shock, leaned forward into his mic with a wry grin. "So, Mr. Griggs, does that mean the ranch is his now?" A ripple of laughter and applause moved through the crowd, hesitant at first, but growing the sort of applause that's part celebration, part challenge. Charles cut the air with his hand, voice booming. "You think a damn pet trick means you get a deed." his lips curled into a sneer. Fine. You want it? Then break the damn horse in 30 days. Ride him. Control him. Prove he ain't just standing still out of pity. He glared at Frank. Put it in writing. Let's see if the soldier can ride more than ghosts. The tension in the arena shifted no longer just about a wild horse, but about pride, legacy, and the uneasy line between fate and foolishness. Someone in the crowd let out a long whistle. The phones kept rolling. Mila, ever the chronicler, flipped her camera around and kept streaming. The number of viewers online shot up 10,000, then 50, then 100,000 in 20 minutes. Clips of the handshake of Valor's gentle bow were spreading everywhere, gathering thousands of comments. Valor challenge, the cruiser, the soldier, and the beast. Bucker Griggs bet hashtags, blooming like wildfire. Frank, hands still shaking, found his notebook and started scribbling the terms. Okay, listen up, he called, trying to steady his voice over the crowd. Here's what's fair. Jack Maddox has 30 days starting now to train and control Valor. On day 30 at next month's El Paso County Rodeo, there'll be a public test. He rides, Valor proves full command, start, stop, turn, calm under pressure. If he does it, Frank paused, looking up at Charles, who nodded stiffly. He gets legal residence on the north half of the ranch, plus an official contract to launch a warhorse rehab program funded by Griggs Ranch. Frank's eyes darted to Jack, then the crowd. If he fails, he's got to leave El Paso for good. Name's off the books. No coming back. Charles forced a mocking smile, spitting a splinter of hay to the side. Fair deal, cowboy. Or you planning to vanish before breakfast? The crowd waited. Phones angled for close-ups, hoping to catch the crack, the first sign of nerves. Jack looked Griggs in the eye, unflinching voice, steady as weathered stone. I don't vanish, I rebuild. And I've rebuilt worse than a ranch. Frank caught Charles's eye, then Jack's, the lines on his face softening with something close to respect. Maybe it was the way Jack stood easy, almost grateful, with one hand resting on Valor's neck, as if they'd always belonged to each other. Mila edged closer, lowering her phone to her side. Do you even have a place to sleep? She asked, her voice soft, more curious than challenging. Jack smiled, a small, tired smile, like a man who knows how little he needs. He stroked Valor's main fingers, gentle. Right now I've got a friend. That's more than I had yesterday. Somewhere a breeze picked up swirling dust around their feet. Frank pressed a battered water bucket into Jack's hands, along with a bundle of worn blankets and an old canvas tarp. You'll need grit, Frank said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 old regrets. But I think you've got it. The crowd, restless and still buzzing with the electric promise of something unrepeatable, started to break up. Children trailed after their parents, already retelling the story. Cowboys shook their heads, some betting Jack wouldn't last a week. The sun hung low, washing the empty stalls in a gold haze as shadows grew long and slow across the yard. Jack led Valor to the back of the stable block, an overgrown corner where grass had swallowed the fence, and nobody went unless forced. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and dry earth. Valor followed without a lead, as if the pact made in the arena still held. Mila lingered by the gate, biting her lip, uncertain whether to offer encouragement or warning. She hesitated, then turned, filming a slow pan of Jack's silhouette against the burning sky before posting it live for all to see. On TikTok, the video appeared with a new caption, 30 days. One horse, one man with nothing to lose. The comment count soared. He won't make it. That horse is cursed. Bet he changes everything. You can't fix broken. But Jack didn't hear any of it. He spread the blankets on a mound of straw, filled Valor's bucket with water, and settled in for the night with nothing but the company of a horse, who, just like him, was more than the world believed. Somewhere out past the fences, coyotes began to howl at the rising moon. In the hush that followed, Jack rested his hand on Valor's shoulder and whispered, "We start over tomorrow, soldier. One step at a time, no matter what they say." And in the quiet, Valor seemed to nod just once, as if to say, "We're not done yet." Dawn arrived, not with a blaze, but as a soft gray curtain across the northern edge of Griggs Ranch, a part of the property that everyone, even the bravest stable hands, had avoided for months. Fog clung to the ground and to the rusting fences. In this forgotten corner where the grass grew taller than the boots of most men, Jack Maddox woke with the sun and the old army blanket still wrapped tight around his shoulders. He didn't start the day with orders or shouts, as so many had with Valor before. Instead, he moved quietly, rolling his bedroll and brushing the dust from his battered jeans. He brewed instant coffee on a battered camp stove beside the fence, then sat book in hand just inside the reach of the morning sun. He read sometimes aloud, sometimes to himself. Occasionally, he'd whistle low and tuneless, nothing more than a gentle disturbance in the silent morning air. From the far end of the overgrown paddock, Valor snorted and paced. The big stallion stomped at the earth, tossing his head as if warning off some invisible challenger. But there were no ropes, no lunging lines, no stinging crops or sharp commands. There was just the steady presence of a man who refused to invade, and the slow, subtle shifting of a wild animal who was waiting to see what happened next. On the second morning, Jack brought out a bucket of fresh water and a small armful of sweet-smelling hay, leaving them 5 meters from the fence line where the grass was least trampled. He said nothing. He didn't ask, didn't plead, didn't bargain. He simply sat back on his heels and waited eyes on his book content to let Valor set the rules. It was a strategy that no one in the ranch had ever seen before. Not the breaking of a beast, but the rebuilding of trust. Each day, Jack inched his offerings closer to the fence. Each night he slept under the stars, the horse's silhouette always somewhere in the periphery of his vision. The others watched from a distance. Frank Delaney, who'd seen every method of breaking from brute force to bribery, muttered that Jack was either the bravest or the stupidest man he'd ever hired. Mila Griggs, meanwhile, kept her camera off and simply observed her curiosity blooming into something like respect. On the 5th day, the air had a heaviness that hinted at coming rain. Jack noticed Valor's steps had a subtle hitch, a slight but persistent limp in his left hind leg. He filed the detail away. No panic, no fuss. When Valor finally allowed him to approach, Jack moved, slow-talking all the while, in the same gentle cadence. "It's all right, soldier. You can tell me where it hurts." Squatting down beside the stallion, Jack pressed his fingers gently along the cannon bone. Valor jerked back, almost catching Jack in the shoulder with a kick. Jack didn't yell. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he sighed a deep, bone-tired exhale and stepped away. "You've been carrying that pain a long time, haven't you? No wonder you don't trust them." He let the moment be. That evening, after Valor wandered off, Jack biked into town. At the feed store, he bought a basic vet kit, antiseptic gauze, a mild sedative, a rusty pair of forceps. He paid with his last few crumpled bills, foregoing dinner for the chance to ease a suffering that he now saw as kin to his own. The next few days became a careful dance. Each time Jack got near the wound, Valor tensed, but Jack never forced it. He let the horse sniff his hands, let him back away, always returning with a soft word and a gentle brush. After a while, Valor allowed Jack to clean the area, massaging the tense muscles around the hard lump embedded deep in the flesh. It was on the 7th night, under the faded light of a hunter's moon, that the boundary shifted. Jack sat with his notebook, making field sketches and scribbling thoughts just like he had during his army days. The air was alive with the sounds of insects and far-off coyotes. Valor, restless and pacing, finally came close and stopped behind Jack's shoulder. Jack didn't look up. He simply reached into his duffel and pulled out a battered sepia-toned photograph. He pressed his thumb against the image, feeling the edges worn but familiar. "You remember me, don't you?" Jack whispered. He held the photo up in the moonlight. In it, a younger Jack, jaw clean-shaven, face sunburnt and eyes alive, stood beside a military horse, both of them caught in a rare, unguarded moment of laughter. The insignia on the saddle blanket was unmistakable United States Army 2nd Cavalry, Kandahar Division. Jack remembered that year, 2011, the Afghan hills outside Kandahar. His platoon was tasked with patrolling terrain too treacherous for Humvees riding horses that were as much lifeline as liability. Valor, then known as Bravo 6, had carried him through firefights, through fields laced with IEDs, through the burning ruin of villages and the wild safety of midnight retreats. Once Bravo 6 had found a wounded squad mate by scent alone standing guard until help arrived. Another night, when the world was noise and blood, Bravo 6 had pulled Jack out of the kill zone by sheer will and instinct, following the scent of blood on trampled grass. Jack had left Afghanistan with shrapnel in his leg and a black lock of mane folded inside his field journal. He'd assumed Bravo 6 was gone lost to bureaucracy, to auction, to the slow tragedy of forgotten warriors. Now, in the quiet Texas dark, Jack looked at the horse by his side and knew without doubt that this animal was the comrade he'd mourned all those years. "Bravo 6, he whispered. "It's me, Sergeant Maddox. We made it home. Didn't think I'd see you again." Valor's breath misted in the night air. The horse nuzzled closer, the old bond sparking alive, ancient and unbroken. The next morning, Jack approached the paddock with new certainty. He left behind the name Valor, the one given by Griggs and the ranch hands, and called out across the field, voice clear as a bugle, "Stand fast, Bravo 6. This is Sergeant Maddox. I'm here." For the first time, the horse did not shy away. He stilled ears forward and let Jack come within arm's length. "You served with honor, boy. Now let's finish what we started." Jack produced a small flag and the faded insignia of his old unit, carefully folded and fastened to a post near the paddock. It was not a declaration of conquest, but of memory and mutual rescue. By the 10th day, the distance between them had vanished. Jack's hands, steady and patient, tended to the wound at Valor's flank. The horse flinched, but did not fight. With a careful press, Jack extracted a sliver of old metal, a piece of shrapnel blackened with age, the remnant of that long-ago war. When the metal clinked into the stainless steel bowl, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's the last piece of the fight," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You're free, soldier. It's over now." Valor Bravo 6 gave a long, heavy exhale, the kind that sounds like surrender and relief rolled into one. He lowered his head and nudged Jack's shoulder, acceptance in the gesture. That night, for the first time since arriving at Griggs Ranch, Jack didn't sleep with his back to the wall. He lay down in the soft grass on the edge of the paddock, and Valor settled beside him. The two of them, man and horse, survivor and survivor, rested under the quiet gaze of the Texas moon. On the other side of the ranch, Mila Griggs watched from the roof of the hay barn. She kept her camera running but didn't post to the internet, not this time. She saw the way they leaned into each other's presence, saw the unspoken conversation between them. "They don't need an audience," she said softly to herself, lowering the phone. They just need to find their way back. As midnight drew its shadow across the fields, Jack and Bravo 6 slept a constellation of old wounds and new hope finally home after the longest war. By the end of the second week, a hush seemed to fall over Griggs Ranch, a hush not of peace, but of anticipation. Valor, the horse once dubbed the devil with hooves, was no longer a wild shadow at the edge of the property. He was learning by slow degrees to walk calmly at Jack Maddox's side. He tolerated the bridle and even a light saddle. When Jack held out his hand, the stallion would lower his head, almost as if offering trust rather than submission. Mila's updates, short, thoughtful clips documenting each small victory, had begun to sweep across social media. The audience, once a few locals and rodeo fans, exploded into the millions. Comments and shares came from as far as London, Sydney, and Kabul. It wasn't just the story of a horse being broken. It was about healing of man of beast and maybe something greater. Sponsors sensing opportunity began to email Griggs Ranch. Companies specializing in equine therapy, veteran rehabilitation, and even national media outlets reached out. They wanted interviews, partnerships. They wanted the miracle soldier and the war horse. The story was outpacing the control of its owner. Charles Griggs sat in his dark-paneled office, the air conditioner humming against the relentless Texas sun. His face, usually red with sun and whiskey, was pale now as he jabbed a finger at his desktop monitor. The latest video had 2 million views and rising. Emails stacked up in the inbox, most addressed to him, some now addressed to Jack Maddox. He turned to Helen, his wife, her face stern but worried. "This isn't healing anymore," Charles snapped. "This is theft. That drifter, he's trying to steal my name, my ranch, my legacy, and I'm not letting a nobody walk away with it." Helen said nothing, her silence heavy with judgment. But Charles, his pride raw and stinging, wasn't listening for her opinion. He only saw a stranger, one he had underestimated, rising to a place that was supposed to be his alone. That night, as the cicadas hummed and the sky went indigo, Charles summoned Tommy Blake to the barn. Tommy, young and eager to please, had once been scolded by Jack for using a whip on a frightened mare. The humiliation still burned. "You want to make good?" Tommy Charles asked, voice oily and conspiratorial. Tommy nodded, glancing nervously at the dark stalls. "Here's what you're gonna do. Next training, you make sure there's a little excitement. I want that damn horse spooked. I want Maddox on the ground, limping out of here before the weekend. Don't hurt the horse, just scare him. Remind everyone he's still a beast." Charles pressed a handful of cash and a small firecracker packet into Tommy's palm. He also handed over a Bluetooth speaker loaded with shrill, warlike howls. Tommy's hands trembled as he nodded. "You got it, sir." The following night, on the 17th day, the moon rose sharp and bright. Jack, as always, was out in the far paddock, walking Valor in slow circles under the stars. The horse's movement was smoother now, no longer stuttering in pain, but not yet entirely free. Jack's presence was a quiet constant, his voice low, his touch always patient. In the shadows near the hay bales, Tommy crouched, heart pounding. He fiddled with the speaker, double-checking the timer, and slid the firecrackers into a hollow behind the fence. At exactly 8:15 p.m., as Jack was guiding Valor through a simple walk on command, the speakers shrieked a sound like sirens in a nightmare. Simultaneously, the firecrackers spat and popped a flash of chaos in the quiet field. Valor's head shot up, eyes wide with old terror. For a split second, the wildness returned the beast, the panic, the muscle memory of war and fear. But then something different happened. Instead of wheeling away or bolting toward the fence, Valor swung in front of Jack, placing his body between the man and the hidden threat. His body trembled, His breath came in ragged gusts, but he did not flee. He did not attack. He simply stood his ground, refusing to let Jack be exposed. Jack, half fallen in the confusion, realized what was happening and the stallion's body shielding his own. He pressed his hand gently to Valor's trembling shoulder, whispering, "Still got my back, huh, soldier?" From the edge of the barn, a figure stood frozen, Frank Delaney. Arms folded, face lit by the flicker of the barn light. He had seen everything. When the noise finally died, Valor didn't bolt. He circled Jack, ears twitching but never broke contact. Jack brushed the dust from his jeans and stroked the horse's muzzle, steadying them both. "It's all right now," he murmured. "We're here. We're home." Frank lingered in the shadows a moment longer before slipping away, mind already made up. The next morning, the ranch was alive with rumor. The failed sabotage wasn't discussed openly, but whispers passed from stable to bunkhouse to house. Frank, never one for drama, marched straight to the main office. He placed his keys and his work roster on Charles Griggs's polished desk. Charles looked up, frowning. "What's this, Frank? I'm resigning," Frank said, voice as level as the horizon. "I've worked horses all my life. I've kept your barns clean, your foals safe, and your legacy running. But if you're willing to endanger a war horse just to win a bet, then I'm not keeping this place clean anymore." Charles sneered. "You don't know what you saw." Frank met his gaze, steady as stone. "I saw a wounded animal stand between a man and his worst fear. That kind of loyalty can't be bought, sir. It's earned. You lost it the day you turned a living being into a weapon for your pride." He turned on his heel and left, not off the property, but to the far paddock, where he quietly began mucking out Valor's new stall and offering to help Jack however he could. Jack found Frank by the creek, sitting with a battered thermos and a stare that reached back decades. Jack said nothing at first. Instead, he offered Frank a cup of strong coffee, then sat beside him, sharing the silence that only old soldiers know. Frank finally broke it, a wry smile at his lips. "Somalia 92. I used to be Army. Never thought I'd see loyalty like that again, not between a man and a horse, and sure as hell not out here." Jack nodded, staring at the slow water. "They teach us how to survive, but no one teaches us how to come home. I guess that's what we're both learning." Frank gave a gruff laugh. "Maybe the horse is teaching you, or maybe you're teaching him. Either way, I'm sticking around. This is something worth seeing through." Their hands met, scarred and worn across the battered thermos. It was a pact unspoken, but real. On Saturday night, as the heat broke and a cool wind danced across the fields, Mila Griggs watched from beyond the fence. She saw Jack and Valor working together, no halter, no whip. Jack had exchanged his lunge line for a single leather lead, more a gesture than a tool. There was music, soft and wordless, playing from an old radio. Jack sang along sometimes under his breath, the words lost to everyone but Valor. The stallion, calm and attuned, moved with Jack in a rhythm that echoed something ancient, something learned in another world, another war. Instead of posting the footage, Mila kept it saved in a folder marked "Private Healing in Progress." She watched silent as the pair moved in the paddock, sometimes two bodies, sometimes one. "They're not healing," she whispered, almost surprised by her own realization. "They're remembering." That night, under the shelter of the barn, Jack lay on his bedroll, with Valor's great head resting beside him. The lines between man and beast, pain and hope, past and future, had blurred into something whole. And for the first time, the fires of the old war didn't burn. They simply glowed warm and steady, lighting the way forward together. The days following the firecracker incident moved with a different weight. Valor's act throwing himself between Jack and the source of terror had changed the way people saw the horse. The story now belonged to more than just Griggs' ranch. It was spreading through town, and the whispers grew in number and urgency. Mila Griggs, never one to ignore her intuition, felt a growing unease. The horse's reactions, his wild swings between anxiety and calm, the subtle hitch in his gait, told a story deeper than just dangerous blood. On the 20th day, she called in a professional not from the Griggs payroll, but from a place that would silence all doubts. Dr. Evelyn Hartman arrived early, the Texas sun barely above the fence line. She was in her late 40s, hair pulled back in a military bun, her eyes clear and direct. There was something about the way she walked the grounds, purposeful, not arrogant, respectful of both dust and silence, that made even the ranch hands pause. Jack, wary at first, introduced himself quietly. "Sergeant Jack Maddox," he said out of old habit. Dr. Hartman shook his hand with the grip of someone who'd spent her share of days in the field. "Dr. Evelyn Hartman. I spent 12 years with the Army Veterinary Corps. Now I teach at A&M. Let's see your boy." The examination was thorough, not rushed or showy. She ran her hands gently down Valor's legs, feeling for heat and swelling, and then set up a portable ultrasound and an old-school X-ray scanner. Mila recorded, but without the running commentary. She knew when to let images speak. Frank Delaney, never comfortable around technology, watched from a respectful distance. After several minutes, Dr. Hartman called them all in. On the tablet, the black and white scan glimmered an angry line of scarred tissue buried deep in the muscle of Valor's left hind leg. She pointed with a blunt finger. "See this? That's a foreign object scar. I'd say shrapnel or an old bullet. It's caused long-term inflammation. I'm surprised he walks at all, let alone runs." She lifted Valor's leg, watching his eyes as she flexed the joint. He's not unpredictable. He's been living in pain, which means his reactions aren't aggression, they're defense. Jack swallowed, his face tight. How long could it have been there? Dr. Hartman shrugged. Years. Maybe since Afghanistan, if the records match. It's not his fault. She looked at Mila, and noticing the phone camera spoke directly into the lens. This horse is not dangerous. He is in pain. He has been mislabeled, misunderstood, and mistreated. She paused, her voice softening with a steely undertone. In military terms, this isn't a rogue. This is a wounded veteran. There was a long silence after she finished. Even Frank found himself wiping his eyes. News travels faster than a Texas thunderstorm, and Charles Griggs soon caught wind of Mila's video. The comments were piling up, some supportive, some demanding, and some threatening legal action. Unnerved by the direction things were taking, Charles started making noises about rescinding that damn deal. But Mila was prepared. She sent a message to Greg Simmons, a civil and animal law specialist in Austin. Greg arrived at the ranch on the 21st day, cool as a banker in his sunglasses and pressed shirt. He carried a briefcase, a portable hard drive, and a folder thick with documents. They gathered in the main house, Charles stiff, at the head of the table, Jack, quiet but alert. Mila recording on her phone, and Frank standing behind them like a sentinel. Greg started without preamble. "I've reviewed the video evidence," he said, clicking the hard drive onto the table. "Here's the original stream metadata, timestamp, and unedited footage. Here's your voice, Mr. Griggs." He played the crucial line, "If you can touch that beast, the ranch is yours." Greg leaned forward, folding his hands. In Texas civil law, a verbal contract is binding when it is supported by clear action and documented evidence. Live streams, especially with metadata, count. If you try to back out, we'll go to court. And you'll lose more than the ranch. Mr. Griggs, you'll lose your reputation. Charles's jaw worked, but he had no retort ready. He muttered something about needing legal advice and stalked off to his office, slamming the door. Greg packed up his files. If you need me, call. This isn't over, but you're on strong ground, Jack. The legal and veterinary revelations rippled far beyond the boundaries of Griggs' ranch. That night, Mila wrote a post for the Warriors and Animals Trust forum, titling it, "The War Horse That Came Home." She told the story plainly of the old Bet, the battered veteran, the horse who'd been blamed for his pain. She attached photos: Jack's battered hands, Valor's dark eyes, the X-ray of a foreign object. Within 48 hours, the post exploded. 400,000 shares, 12,000 comments, most from fellow veterans. They wrote about horses they'd known, about sudden explosions, about the way animals protected their riders. Some recognized Valor from photos, confirming he'd served at FOB Crimson Hill with the cavalry detachment in 2011. "I rode with that horse in Kandahar," one man wrote. "He saved my squad during an IED attack. He's a hero, not a demon." The organization offered Valor the honorary title Service Equine Survivor, and Stars and Stripes published an article with the headline, "Wounded Horse, Wounded Man, One Mission, Healing Each Other." A 30-second video went viral on X. Jack, under a yellow sky, calling bravo. Easy soldier as Valor trotted to him, no rope, no fear. The world, it seemed, was watching. Late one afternoon, as the sky turned violet and the heat finally gave way, Mila found Jack behind the barn, gently cleaning Valor's hoof. She sat on a hay bale, phone in hand, and scrolled through the latest barrage of comments. She showed Jack a selection notes from old squad-mate strangers, thanking him, even a Marine colonel he'd never met. Many just said, "Welcome home, Sergeant," or "You're not alone." Jack's eyes lingered on the words. He took the phone, reading in silence, then handed it back, hands trembling a little. "They're not watching for fame," Mila said softly. "They're watching because they remember what it felt like to fight, to come home to be seen." Jack nodded slowly, brushing his thumb over Valor's mane. "Then let's tell it right. No polish, no politics, just the truth." Mila smiled, tucking the phone away. That's all anyone really wants. The next morning, Charles Griggs came out to find a new sign, affixed to the training paddock fence: "Training area. No spectators. Respect in progress." He scowled, but said nothing. Inside the corral, Jack guided Valor in slow, careful circles, not for show, but for healing. There was no performance, only practice. On Jack's left arm, a silver and blue band marked his old unit, a small badge of memory of all that had been lost and found. Dr. Evelyn Hartman stood with her clipboard. Frank brought fresh water, and Mila, camera in hand, captured moments, but kept them for the record, not for fame. They were not outcasts now. They were witnesses. And in their own way, they were comrades in arms, healing, protecting, and making sure that for once the invisible were seen. For Jack and Valor, and for all those who had ever been misjudged, misunderstood, or left behind, it was enough. Denver, Colorado. The city buzzed with its own dry, high-altitude energy, but nothing in the streets could compare to the pulse at the heart of the National Rodeo Show. It was the biggest horse event in the Southwest, and for a few days every year, it became a crossroads. Old cowboys, Instagram influencers, battle-scarred veterans, and school kids, wearing plastic boots, all drawn to the promise of something unbreakable, something real. Inside the main arena, rows of lights swept across stands, filled with thousands, cheering, streaming, holding up phones, trading bets in a dozen languages. The event was being broadcast live across 3 major platforms, watched by horsemen in Montana and ranchers in the Outback, by veterans groups, and by a million anonymous insomniacs scrolling through midnight. But none of it reached Jack Maddox as he stood in the shadowed chute, waiting with Valor at his side. The air was thick with the sense of hay sweat and anticipation. Somewhere above a digital clock ticked toward the hour. He pressed his hand gently to the horse's neck, feeling the calm strength there, a pulse not so different from his own. "It's just another field soldier," he murmured. "Just us. Whatever happens, you're not alone." Behind the scenes, Mila Griggs paced nervously with her camera gear, eyes never leaving Jack. Dr. Evelyn Hartman stood with Frank Delaney near the technical judge's box. Their presence wasn't loud, but Jack felt it like the steady reassurance of old comrades before a storm. The announcer's voice echoed, bouncing off steel girders and banners overhead. Now entering the arena, Valor, former military equine. Handler, Jack Maddox. The world seemed to hold its breath. The lights shifted, casting long golden rays on the sand. Jack walked forward, leading Valor by nothing more than a loose rope. No heavy saddle, no bridle. Only a light rope looped softly around the old war horse's neck, and Jack's calloused hand steady on his shoulder. Valor hesitated at the edge of the sand. The crowd went silent. Somewhere in that pause, a memory flickered behind the horse's eyes. 1,000 strange arenas, the boom of mortars, a field in Kandahar where every sound might be the last. He shivered, but Jack didn't push. He simply waited, lowering his head to whisper, "Easy now. Just a field, just us." Valor let out a long breath. Together they stepped into the light. The first test was simple. Or so it appeared: obedience to basic commands: walk, trot, canter, stop. But everyone knew this wasn't a show of brute training. The world had seen enough of that. What mattered was trust communication that didn't need force or spectacle. A white flag official stood at the edge of the arena and gave the signal. Jack raised his hand, voice firm but gentle walk. Valor moved hooves, landing soft, and even his gait relaxed, not the stilted, nervous shuffle of a horse waiting for pain, but a quiet working rhythm tuned to Jack's pace. Trot. Jack clicked his tongue. Valor sped up smooth and controlled a ripple of muscle moving under a battered coat. The audience watched for any twitch, any sign of panic, but the horse's ears were soft, his eyes attentive. Canter. Jack didn't use the rope. He only tapped his knee against Valor's side, and the horse eased into a canter, rounding the arena without hesitation, circling as if it were a familiar pasture. Stop. Jack exhaled, lowering his hand. Valor slowed, halted, then turned to face him, nostrils flaring, waiting for what would come next. A hush fell, broken only by a scattered ripple of applause, respectful, almost reverent. These were not tricks, not circus cues. What everyone saw was a partnership. In every stride, every pause, the lesson was clear. Trust rebuilds itself, inch by inch. The second test was agility, a zigzag course of 7 wooden posts, set at precise intervals. Riders were expected to guide their horses through the slalom, using reins and legs. Jack, however, rode with neither bridle nor bit, just his voice, his posture, and the lightest touch on Valor's neck. They started slow. Jack whispered, right, brushing his fingers against Valor's mane. The horse pivoted smoothly, weaving between the posts. At each turn, Jack's commands barely rose above the arena's hush. Left, easy, turn. Valor responded, never hesitating, never touching a post. His ears flicked forward at each new direction, eyes bright and unafraid. The judges watched intently, jotting notes. At the final post, Jack said quietly, "Turn home." Valor did not gallop, did not rush. He simply turned and traced their path back through the posts, as if retracing old invisible roads. There was something in the way. He moved a certainty that home was not a place, but the presence beside him. The crowd, more than 1,000 strong, sat still breathless. On the live stream, comments poured in by the hundreds, some in disbelief, some in tears. He's not controlling the horse, he's listening to him. The third trial was the hardest response under stress, simulating a battlefield or rescue environment. As Jack and Valor passed the center line, the organizers triggered the test. Out of nowhere, a barrage of sounds crashed through the speaker's miniature firecrackers, the shriek of alarms, the discordant clatter of metal. The volume was calibrated to trigger memory and panic, especially for any animal with a history like Valor's. The first explosion came from behind and to the left, the very side where Valor had once been wounded. The horse's head shot up. Muscles tensed. His body went rigid, legs trembling with the urge to bolt. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Jack dropped the rope. He didn't yank or shout. He stepped in front of Valor, placing himself between the horse and the invisible threat, one hand steady on the animal's neck. "Easy, boy. We're home now. No more running. I'm here." His voice was low, warm, not quite singing, but with the steady cadence of an old lullaby. He felt Valor's pulse racing beneath his palm. He remembered nights under distant stars, gunfire in the hills, the way men and animals learned to lean on each other, surviving by proximity, by faith. For a second, Valor's eyes rolled white. Then Jack started to hum softly an old tune from the barracks, a memory of safe hands and quiet rooms. Valor's breath slowed. His head lowered. He took a step forward, then another and another, until he stood calmly by Jack's side, waiting for the next command. The crowd did not cheer. They simply watched, some with hands pressed to their hearts, others in silent tears. In the fourth row, a man with gray at his temples, dressed in a faded uniform jacket, a military patch on the sleeve, stood and snapped a salute. He was stiff, formal, the gesture crisp and true. Across the arena, others saw, understood, and followed suit. One by one, men and women rose to their feet. Some were veterans, others simply recognized courage in any species. No applause, no shouts, just the silence of respect stretching across the stadium like a banner of invisible cloth. Mila tried to steady her camera, her vision blurred by tears she did not bother to wipe away. Dr. Hartman took Frank's hand in hers, their shared relief and pride too big for words. Charles Griggs, watching from the front row, bowed his head. There was no argument left to make. The evidence was living, breathing, undeniable. When the last test was done, Jack led Valor to the center of the arena, the sunlight slanting gold through the rafters. He paused facing the judges, then took the old silver and blue armband from his wrist, his unit insignia, the only keepsake from a life before all the loss. He looped it over the arena post and bowed his head, a simple gesture of thanks, surrender, and closure all at once. He did not ask for applause or prizes. He only wanted witness. Without a word, Jack turned and walked out. Valor pacing beside him, no need for halter, no command. They left the arena in the same way they had entered together, dignified, unbroken. Behind them, the judge voice, thick with emotion, broke the hush. That horse was never lost. We just forgot how to listen. The moment the arena emptied and the roar of live stream applause faded to a low buzz, the spotlight shifted not to the victorious, but to the man who held the deed. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Officials approached the stage with a ceremonial plaque and a photographer's flash, ready to immortalize the transfer of honor. Yet Charles Griggs did not step forward. He was found instead pacing the edges of the VIP box, lips pressed tight in a crooked line, sunglasses masking his eyes. A group of reporters intercepted him, mics flashing, hungry for a quote. He smirked and lifted his chin, voice smooth as varnish. That was just a joke, he said, each syllable slow and dismissive. You can't seriously think I'd give my land away over a stunt like that. The reaction was immediate, a shiver in the crowd, then an angry swell. Someone shouted, "We saw the video, you made the bet." Others picked up the call. A ripple of voices, a single word, promise. Griggs only shrugged, still playing to the cameras. There's no contract, just a bit of crowd banter. No lawyer would touch this, trust me. Across the arena, Jack stood silent, hand steady on Valor's lead rope. He didn't react. He didn't glare or plead. He simply turned, guiding the old horse away from the stage, as if walking through a storm he'd seen too many times before. But Mila Griggs did not turn away. She strode onto the stage, holding high a sheaf of papers, copies of the live broadcast timestamps, notarized footage, and legal affidavits. Her voice cut through the confusion. If it's a joke, let's see what the courts think. Let's see if a man's word means more than his land. For a beat, no one moved. Then the cameras spun, capturing the new center of gravity, the moment when silence became a question for everyone in the room. Mila didn't stand alone. At her side were Dr. Evelyn Hartman, tall and quietly resolute. Greg Simmons, the civil attorney whose reputation needed no introduction. Frank Delaney, the wrangler who'd held Valor's rope. And most striking of all, Helen Griggs, Charles's wife. Helen stepped forward, her presence calm, but her voice unwavering. I was standing right beside you, Charles, when you made that promise. I've stood beside you for 30 years. But not today. Frank, never a man for crowds, took the microphone with a working man's grace. I was the one holding the lead rope when Jack touched that horse. I heard every word. So did half the county. Greg Simmons followed, laying out the facts with the precision of a practiced hand. He called up the live stream frame by frame, voice by voice, the evidence irrefutable. The video showed Charles's challenge, the handshake, the cheering crowd, and the terms spoken for all to hear. The live stream authenticated, time-stamped, and with no edits, Greg set his voice ringing out over the speakers. Media responses, event reports, and the rodeo's own records recognized this as a binding commitment. This is no joke. This is a public contract. A wave of murmurs moved through the audience, swelling into a chant, "Keep your promise, keep your promise." It was more than legal now. It was a matter of honor with 1,000 eyes and a nation's expectations weighing down the moment. In the tension that followed, Jack lifted his hand for the microphone. His posture was straight, his face lined with wear, but his eyes held neither anger nor pride, only a steady resolve. He spoke slowly, each word measured, echoing in the hushed arena. I don't want your empire. I don't want your barns, your bloodlines, or your name. I just want a piece of land. Not for myself, for broken warriors. Like him, he nodded at Valor, and like me. He gestured toward the veterans who stood in quiet rows beyond the fence, men and women carrying their own invisible scars. A field, a place of shelter, a place that reminds the wounded that silence is not failure, that the world can still change for the better. No one interrupted. There was no applause, no heckling, just the sound of a few quietly weeping hands pressed to faces, hearts suddenly open. Helen crossed the stage, taking Charles's hand. She didn't pull or force, but the gesture was clear, the weight of a lifetime together now hanging on a single decision. After what felt like an eternity, Charles Griggs stepped forward. For the first time, his bravado dropped, replaced by a different kind of gravity, a man seeing his legacy measured in something other than dollars. He looked at Jack, searching for some sign of a trick, and found none. You really want to turn that field into... What a ranch for broken souls, Jack nodded. That's all I've ever wanted." Charles exhaled the fight, leaving his shoulders. "Then take the north lot. 30 acres. It's yours. But don't put my name on it." Jack smiled, a real small, unburdened smile. "I don't intend to." They shook hands, not as victors or rivals, but as men who had finally understood the price of integrity. The applause that rose then wasn't deafening, but it was deep, heartfelt, a sound that said something in this world had finally been made right. 2 months later, on the once barren northern field of the Griggs Ranch, a new wooden sign swung in the warm breeze, "Valor Rising Project," a place for healing horses and warriors. It had taken more than legal threats. It had taken the weight of a community, the persistence of those who had seen too much pain to ever mistake kindness for weakness. Funding poured in from national veterans groups, animal rescue alliances, and over $20,000 in small donations from strangers inspired by the story. Dr. Evelyn Hartman led the medical team, making sure every rescue animal and human received care without judgment. Mila took charge of communications, her videos showing real moments, real struggle, real hope. Frank, always the pragmatic backbone, managed operations with the patience of a man who had learned that trust was built, not bought. On the center's opening day, a group of veterans, some walking, some riding, circled the field, each leading or riding a horse branded "Too Far Gone." They moved together in silent formation, and their faces solemn, but their backs straight, as if reclaiming something lost. And at the very end of the line rode Jack Maddox, bareback on valor, no saddle, no bridle. Only the shared understanding of survivors who had returned. Valor, once dismissed as dangerous and disposable, was now the living symbol of what could be redeemed. Near the entrance, a cairn of stones had been laid, and into the largest was etched, "For those who were never thanked, and for those who were never asked." A boy with trembling hands placed a flower there. An old woman knelt and wept. No one laughed at this, not even Charles Griggs, who stood at the edge of the field hat, pressed to his chest, letting himself believe in something he couldn't quite name. And as the sun set over Valor Rising, Jack watched his horse, old but unbowed, grazing beside a pack of rescued souls. He felt the past sliding off his shoulders, not erased, but finally honored. In that moment, every broken promise, every dismissed life, every wound that refused to heal became part of the story. Not as tragedy, but as the foundation for a new beginning. For Valor, for Jack, for everyone who had ever been told they were beyond saving. And in the hush of that evening, the field seemed to breathe, carrying forward a vow. No one is lost, not as long as there's someone willing to listen. The first autumn at Valor Rising settled like a gentle hand over the ranch. Golden sunlight slanted across the paddocks, catching in the tall grass and lending the fields a soft, forgiving glow. 3 months had passed since Jack Maddox led Valor, scarred but undefeated, through the gate that bore their new name. The hard part, everyone thought, had been the battle for the land. In truth, the real work was only beginning. Jack had always believed in doing things quietly. He would rise before dawn, shovel out stalls, run his hands along fences in need of repair, and every so often just stop and watch the light change over the eastern pasture where Valor grazed. He didn't need titles, didn't want them, but he knew the project needed more than one man's stubborn heart. It was Frank Delaney, grizzled and plain-spoken as ever, who finally cornered him in the tack room one morning. "You want this place to last, Jack. You need someone who understands more than horses and hammering boards. You need someone who knows how to listen." Jack knew he was right, and he knew exactly who Frank meant. At first, Mila Griggs wanted nothing to do with it. "I'm not a trainer. I'm not a therapist. I just take pictures and run a few cameras," She protested, arms crossed, camera strap tangled in her fingers. She had been the invisible force behind the viral videos, the quiet observer, the bridge between Valor's story and the world outside the ranch's fence lines. But one by one, the people who had become her second family pushed back. Dr. Evelyn Hartman, with her matter-of-fact tone and gentle hands, said, "Mila, you see things most people look past. You see when a horse is about to bolt, when a veteran is about to shatter. You're not here because of what you film. You're here because of what you notice." Frank, gruff as ever, only said, "You don't have to break anything. You just have to help hold it together." But it was a young veteran named Rafe, who'd arrived barely speaking nightmares, looping behind his tired eyes, who gave Mila the final push. "I trusted a horse before I trusted myself," he told her during a late-night walk by the fence line. "And I trusted you before I trusted anyone here. You just listened. That's more than anyone else has done." In the end, it wasn't the praise that convinced her. It was the quiet faith, the unspoken understanding that no one at Valor Rising was there by accident. So Mila accepted Jack's offer. She would become the technical director and head of training. Her first act was to overhaul everything the experts had recommended. She replaced rigid schedules with open-ended time slots. Horses were never forced, only invited. Veterans were paired with animals, not by what they could do, but by what they needed. She called it the Equine Echo Program, a pairing system where healing began not with action, but with stillness. You don't fix a soul by dragging it forward, Mila said in her first seminar at the Texas Equine Therapy Conference. You fix it by being still long enough for it to trust the silence again. Her words caught fire online. Soon, Valor Rising became known not just as a ranch, but as a sanctuary, a place where brokenness was never punished and healing was never rushed. 14 veterans arrived each month for a 45-day immersion. Some brought anger, some brought silence, some brought nothing but exhaustion. But Mila's approach, gentle, patient, quietly insistent, opened doors that had been closed for years. And always at the heart of Valor Rising was Valor himself. No longer confined to a single stall or paddock, Valor roamed the eastern meadow, grazing in the shadow of the low hills. He was an old horse now, the graying at his muzzle like frost on new grass. But there was a regal calmness to him, a sense that he had seen the very worst the world could offer and survived, not in spite of it, but because of it. Jack was adamant. He knows the edges of this place better than we do. Let him roam. He earned it. Valor became the first companion for every new arrival. Not to ride, not to command, but simply to walk beside. One soldier missing his right arm from an IED learned to guide Valor using only the soft cues of his voice. Another, a former Army nurse, haunted by the echo of fireworks, found solace in singing softly to Valor as she brushed his coat, her lullabies trembling, at first growing stronger with every day. Some visitors didn't know the full story. They didn't know the details of the bet, the viral videos, or the storm of legal battles that brought Valor here. They just called him reverently, the one that stood still when the fireworks began. A journalist from Veteran Wellness magazine visited one week, her notes filling with observations, her voice awed. He's not just a horse, she wrote in her feature story. He's the first thing many veterans here choose to trust again. Valor's face appeared on the cover beneath the headline, "The Soldier Who Came Home on 4 Legs." For weeks afterward, donations and letters poured in from around the country, thank yous, prayers, small checks, photos of lost brothers and long-gone horses, all stitched together by the common thread of wanting, needing hope. 9 months after opening, the Valor Rising Project was invited to the National Forum on Veteran Rehabilitation in Washington, D.C. It was the kind of honor that made even Jack, who loathed the spotlight, clean his boots and iron his shirt. Jack, Mila, and 2 program alumni stood before more than 300 delegates, representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the National Animal Assisted Therapy Council, and an array of PTSD advocacy groups. Mila opened the session with a quiet account of the equine echo method. Jack described what it meant to trust again, to be trusted by something wild. A Pentagon official in the soft gray of dress uniform caught Jack afterward. His handshake was firm, his eyes ringed with the kind of tiredness only soldiers recognize. "We trained you for war," the official admitted. "You trained yourself for healing. Now we want to learn from you." Jack only shook his head, voice gravelly with memory. "I didn't do it alone. Valor did half the work." He paused, glancing at Mila, at the silent faces of his friends. Maybe more. The forum was a turning point. Applications for the program tripled. Other centers requested training in the equine echo model. Valor's story and Mila's spread not as legend, but as blueprint. The following autumn, under a sky so clear, it seemed almost painted, Mila organized a new tradition. The first metal rope ceremony. On a makeshift stage near the main barn, horses, who had completed their journey, survivors of pain, fear, and abandonment, were given a soft blue ribbon, tied gently around a post beside their stalls. It was not a trophy. It was a sign you made it home. You can begin again. Valor naturally was the first, but there was no speech. Jack stepped up, knotted the ribbon to a weathered rail, patted Valor's thick neck, and stepped back without a word. Frank, standing nearby, wiped his hands on his jeans. "He doesn't need words," he muttered, just loud enough for Mila and Dr. Hartman to hear. "The damn horse is the speech." Helen Griggs, once silent in her support, stood at the edge of the crowd. Tears rolled unchecked down her cheeks as she watched the veterans, men and women who had survived battles visible and invisible, reach out to touch Valor's mane. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't need to. As the ceremony ended, Jack wandered to the crest of the eastern hill where a new sign had been raised. The words were simple, carved by hand into cedar: "Valor rising, we do not break. We begin again." He stood there a while, the setting sun warm on his back, listening to the sound of horses moving below, to the laughter and low voices of those who had found their way here. In that moment, Jack realized what had been built was larger than one man's dream. It was a refuge, yes, but more a living promise. He watched as Mila, at ease now in her role, guided a new arrival toward the old gray horse waiting by the fence. He watched as Valor, once discarded, once forgotten, bent his head, accepting a gentle hand, as if it was the only thing that had ever mattered. And in that golden hush, as day slipped into evening, the boundaries between scars and hope, between survival and true living, faded to nothing. Valor Rising had begun. The wind at Valor Rising always seemed to carry a different scent depending on who you asked. For Jack, it was the mix of sweat and hay, the memory of desert sand, and sometimes the quiet hush before an old pain surfaced. For the horses, it was the promise of cool water and soft hands. But for the young who found their way to the ranch, those with no place to go, no roots in the world, the wind was possibility, still and simple. The day the children arrived was not remarkable by the calendar. There was no storm, no parade, just a battered yellow bus rolling to a stop outside the new wooden archway that read, "Valor Rising. We do not break. We begin again." A partnership with the State Children's Home had brought them here, a dozen kids' faces, wary or bored or simply blank, all carrying duffel bags that seemed heavier than they should. Frank and Mila greeted them with practiced cheer. Dr. Hartman waved her clipboard, trying to make the rules sound like adventure. But Jack hung back as always, letting them come at their own pace. One boy never left the shadow of the fence. His name was Toby Hill. He was 12, maybe 13, but carried himself like someone twice his age. He wore 3 shirts, all gray, none the right size, and they sat for hours, cross-legged in the tall grass outside Valor's paddock, unmoving, unblinking arms wrapped tight around his knees. He didn't speak to the other kids. He didn't answer the counselor's gentle questions. But he watched the big scarred horse with a steady, guarded intensity that reminded Jack of an old battlefield eyes that had seen too much a body tensed for what might come next. For days, Valor paid him no mind content to graze a careful distance away. But gradually, the gap closed, an inch here, a foot there, until the boy and the horse could both feel each other's breath in the morning chill. One afternoon, Jack knelt beside him. He didn't speak at first, just sat letting the sun warm his back, listening to the distant rhythm of hooves and the thrum of cicadas. After a long time, he asked softly, "You like him?" Toby shrugged, barely moving. Then after another silence, he whispered, "He don't talk either." Jack recognized the look in Toby's eyes, the hunger for connection mixed with the terror that again it might be taken away. He'd seen it in the mirror years ago as a boy left to fight for scraps in a world that had no patience for the lost. He'd seen it in soldiers returning home with empty sleeves and haunted stares waiting for someone to tell them they belonged. He learned that Toby had seen his father shot in a gas station holdup. The boy had lived in 6 foster homes since then, each one more violent or indifferent than the last. He had no one. Just a memory of his father's rough hands, and the unspoken rule survive no matter what. Over the next weeks, Toby began to follow Jack, shadowing him at chores, trailing just far enough behind that it didn't count as asking for help. Sometimes Jack would hand him a shovel or a brush and say, "You got 2 hands, that's all I need." And Toby would nod wordless, but the corners of his mouth would twitch, almost a smile. It was Mila who first suggested what everyone was already thinking. After a staff meeting, she found Jack oiling Valor's hooves and said, "He's yours, you know. He's just waiting for you to say it." Jack looked at her startled, but found no sarcasm in her tone. Just a calm, quiet certainty. The paperwork was finished a week later. Guardianship, not adoption, but to Toby it made little difference. On the day the last form was signed, Jack sat him down on the porch. "I don't have much," he said, "but I have a horse who listens and a bed that's warm. That's a start." Toby only nodded, eyes bright, and that was enough. Life at Valor Rising shifted almost imperceptibly to make room for one more soul. Toby found his place quickly. He was small for his age, but could wrangle a halter as deftly as Frank, and soon knew each horse's mood by the flick of an ear. Valor, for his part, accepted the boy as if he'd always belonged, standing still for grooming, lowering his massive head so Toby could slip the bridle over his nose. Jack saw pieces of himself in the boy, the stubbornness, the quick defensive flares, but also a tenderness he'd long ago learned to hide. At night, he'd find Toby asleep in the hay Valor nearby the barn lamp, casting their shadows together on the wall. No words were needed. Sometimes healing was a silent thing. Then, one November evening, as dusk bled into the sky, a battered blue pickup truck rolled up to the front gate. It stopped, engine idling, as if its driver was weighing whether to turn back. After a moment, the door opened and a woman stepped out. She wore jeans and scuffed boots, hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid, a fatigue jacket over her shoulders. Jack froze. It had been nearly 2 decades since he'd seen his sister, Lena Maddox. They had grown up hard, tough love, tougher silence. After their mother died, Lena had left Texas with a bag of clothes and more anger than hope, vowing never to return. For years, all Jack knew of her came through occasional postcards, mostly unsigned. Now Lena held up a folded newspaper. The headline was old, but unmistakable. "The soldier who came home. On 4 legs, Valor Rising opens its gates." Taped in the margin, a note in Lena's sharp handwriting, "Is this really you, big brother?" The reunion was awkward at first. Jack fumbled with the gate latch, hands shaking. Lena kept her arms crossed, jaw tight. "I thought you hated me," Jack said finally. Lena shook her head. "I didn't hate you. I hated that you left." Her eyes drifted to the barns, the paddocks, the children running with dogs at their heels. "Turns out, I was just waiting for you to come home." Valor interrupted the moment, nuzzling up, bumping Lena's arm, until she laughed, the sound startling both of them. The ice melted bit by bit as Valor pressed his scarred head into her hand. Lena had come back to Texas to take a job as a nurse at the county hospital. But the truth was, she was tired of hospitals, of dying, of always being the one to break bad news. Jack offered her a room at the ranch, no expectations, just a place to rest. She found her calling almost by accident. The children gravitated to her, drawn by her calm, direct presence. The veterans, too, respected her medical knowledge and her refusal to coddle them. Lena soon began coordinating care for the ranch's most fragile cases: PTSD survivors, traumatized children, horses with histories no one wanted to believe. Toby, who had never called anyone ma'am in his life, did so for Lena. He even trusted her enough to let her tend a split knuckle or listen wordlessly when the nightmares returned. Jack, for the first time in years, felt like he was part of a family again. Not perfect, not healed, but together, and that was enough. The seasons rolled by. Valor Rising changed, growing not in size so much as in depth. They took in more veterans, more horses, more kids who had nowhere else to go. The numbers told a story all their own: 93 veterans successfully reintegrated, 42 unadoptable horses rescued and trained, 8 at-risk children placed in foster care or with families, some through Jack's quiet advocacy. Word spread. One spring, a state senator visited, flanked by reporters and aides. After a tour and a session in the main barn, he stood at the fence and said, "You built more than a ranch. You built a mirror, and it reflects who we forgot to protect." Other ranches followed. Under Lena's leadership, Mila's media sense, and Jack's unwavering quiet, a coalition formed, first a trickle, then a tide. They named it the Valor Rising Network. From battlefields to healing fields. Dakota Hope Ranch, Ironwood Echo Center, Georgia Haven for Horse and Hero. Each new site carried a piece of the original flame. A national TV spot showed scenes from across the network, Toby now taller leading Valor, and a new Mustang through the fields. Mila teaching volunteers by the round pen. Lena embracing a girl who had once cowered at every loud sound. At the edge of the frame, always was Jack, one hand on Valor's back. No words, just presence. Valor had become legend. The kids called him the one that stood still when the fireworks began. Reporters flocked for stories, researchers for data. But at its heart, Valor Rising was still just a home for the lost and hurting, two-legged or four. One crisp morning, a new visitor asked Jack, "What do you do here exactly?" He thought for a long time before answering. "We wait," he said, "until they come close. Then we walk beside them. That's enough." On the gate hung a new wooden sign, "Here nothing is too broken to begin again." Below, on a strip of hand-forged iron, another line burned into memory, dedicated to every soldier, two-legged or four, who kept going when no one asked them to. Sometimes at night, Jack would walk the fields listening to the soft nickers and breathing of horses, The laughter of children in the bunkhouse, the low voices of veterans swapping stories around the fire. He'd stand at the crest of the hill, hand on valor's withers, and let the wind wash over him, carrying away the weight of old regrets. He knew the work would never be finished. There would always be another child, another veteran, another horse in need of patience and faith. But he also knew the greatest lesson Valor Rising had taught, one that no trauma could erase, no loss could diminish. We do not break. We begin again. And as long as someone somewhere believed that, well, that was enough. It was a winter morning that started like any other. The air was crisp, breath clouding in front of faces, and a gentle frost glazed the western pasture. Jack rose before sunrise, made his coffee, and set out with Rookie, his aging companion, trailing behind. The quiet was profound. Deeper than most days, a hush that seemed to wrap the world in soft cotton. Rookie, ever watchful, nudged Jack toward the cypress grove near the ridge. There, beneath the great tree that had been Valor's favorite resting spot for years, Jack found him. Valor was lying on his side legs, folded neatly, his gray-black coat dusted with the faintest shimmer of morning frost. His breath had stopped, but there was no sign of struggle, just the kind of peace animals know how to find, and people too often forget. Jack knelt and placed a trembling hand on Valor's shoulder. The old horse was still warm. Jack sat beside him, knees in the grass, and let the silence fill the space between them. He remembered every step of their journey, from the first wild, desperate look at the auction through battles on distant soil, to the patient mornings in the round pen when the whole world had seemed to rest on a nod or a breath. Now there was nothing more to say. He stayed there all morning, listening to the gentle rustle of the wind in the branches, the birds lifting their song, and somewhere far off the laughter of children and the call of horses in the lower fields. The sun rose higher, burning away the frost, and still Jack sat, just one hand resting on Valor, remembering. When at last he stood, he found that Mila and Frank had noticed his absence. They came quietly, saw the truth, and needed no words. Mila's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She simply wrote a sign and hung it at the main gate. The soldier has gone home. Dr. Hartman stood beside her, hand resting on her arm, while the others gathered in silent understanding. All operations at Valor Rising ceased that day. No lessons, no therapy sessions, no tours. The only sounds were footsteps on gravel and the quiet murmur of those who came to say goodbye. Valor was buried on the crest of the western hill beneath the ancient oak that had shaded generations of children and horses. Jack himself carved the inscription for the simple headstone, "Valor not tamed, not broken, just understood." The funeral was small but profound. Friends and strangers gathered, each with their own memories, veterans who had found the courage to heal children who had learned trust for the first time, horses who had followed Valor's steady leadership. Toby Hill, now grown and running a Valor Rising branch in Oregon, came with his young son, Pedro. Together, they led a young colt to the grave, laying a wreath of wildflowers at its base. Jack did not make a long speech. He stood before the children, hands in his pockets, and spoke softly. He wasn't broken. He was misunderstood, just like most of us. And he never gave up on anyone, even when we gave up on ourselves. The wind caught his words and carried them down the hill, across the ranch, and out into the world beyond. Years passed, but the story of Valor did not fade. If anything, it took on new shape and substance, transforming from a single quiet legend into a living force that stretched across states and generations. 5 years after Valor's death, the organization had become a true national network. A nonprofit spanning 10 states, from the rolling plains of Texas to the icy valleys of Alaska, the mountains of Montana to the orange groves of Florida. More than 7,200 veterans and 2,000 abandoned animals had found their way through its gates, emerging changed sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that altered the course of their lives. The Valor Rising Network was now staffed by a cadre of professionals and those who had once been students themselves. Psychologists specializing in trauma, equine trainers, medical advisors, counselors, and most powerfully former graduates who came back not just to give, but to belong. A new program, Legacy Saddles, had begun to capture hearts and minds. Each graduate received a miniature wooden saddle engraved with the name of the horse that had walked beside them. Some carried them on keychains, others set them on desks, a reminder of a promise kept of battles fought and survived. Lena Maddox, Jack's sister, herself shaped by years of struggle and reconciliation, founded the Valor Heartmen Grant, a scholarship fund dedicated to orphans wishing to become nurses, veterinarians, or therapists. The fund was named for both the horse and Dr. Hartman, who had stayed until her last days, advocating for every lost soul and animal that crossed her path. Mila, ever the quiet force, became the executive director of the national network. She refused to move away from the original ranch, insisting the roots are here. Every month, she led at least one therapy group herself, her hands, her stories, and her patient presence, reminding newcomers that healing was never a straight path. Some things never changed. Valor's grave became a pilgrimage site. Children brought drawings, veterans left medals, mothers came to sit in silence and watch the valley roll out below. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, the old oak was decorated with ribbons and dog tags, and Jack would find himself surrounded by faces new and old, sharing the same silent gratitude. As for Jack, by now, well past 70, he lived alone in a small cabin near the ridge, a stone's throw from Valor's grave. He refused interviews, awards, and speeches. His morning ritual never varied: brew a strong cup of coffee, walk with Rookie, the latest in a long line of rescued horses, and tip his hat to the new arrivals making their way up the road. He liked to sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the shadows lengthen across the fields. Sometimes children would run past chasing dogs or kites or their own wild laughter. Veterans strolled together, leaning on each other or the steady shoulders of their horses. One afternoon, a young trainee, a girl just discharged from the Air Force, her arms still in a cast, found him by the paddock. She looked up shyly. "Are you the founder?" Jack grinned deep lines, creasing his weathered face. "No, he is." He pointed to the western hill where Valor's headstone caught the setting sun. Some people gallop, Jack thought. Others simply wait. Near the main entrance, a small bronze statue was placed, a tribute not to conquest or bravado, but to gentleness and patience. The sculpture showed an old horse bowing his head in stillness, flanked by a child and a man, neither reaching, both simply there. The inscription read, "Some legends gallop, others simply wait." 20 years after Valor Rising first opened its doors, the ranch hosted its largest homecoming yet. Hundreds arrived, alumni, staff, new and old friends, some with children of their own, now clambering up the paddock fence or riding the patient horses in the arena. There was a Marine who had lost a leg in Iraq and now led training sessions for amputee veterans. There was a woman who had stood at the edge, once ready to let go, who now ran the summer equine camp for teenagers. Parents brought children who'd learned to sleep through thunderstorms by listening to a horse's steady breathing. The day was full of food, music, and laughter. But as dusk fell, a quiet procession formed, winding up the gentle slope to the western hill. One by one, people stopped by the old oak, touching the weathered stone, laying down small tokens: a coin, a ribbon, a scrap of paper, a dog tag, a sliver of apple pie. Pedro, Toby Hill's son, knelt beside his father and whispered, "Is he still listening, Dad?" Toby smiled and nodded, eyes damp. always. Jack came last, moving slowly, a cane in one hand and a battered hat in the other. He stood for a long moment, gazing out over the valley, the shadows of memory stretching far and long. "Still listening, old man," he murmured, voice trembling but strong. "Yeah, I thought so." He set down a single wildflower at the base of the stone and walked back toward the lights of the ranch, leaving the wind and the stars to keep watch. That night, the moon rose over Valor Rising, pale and bright, illuminating the fields and barns, the play of children's voices, and the gentle, rhythmic nicker of horses settling down for the night. In the quiet, you could almost hear the echo of hooves, the soft reassurance of a breath against your shoulder, and the unspoken promise that no one, not man, not horse, would ever have to walk alone. For some, the ranch was just a place to heal. For others, it was the only home they'd ever known. For all, it was proof that hope could be rebuilt from the bones of what had been broken, and that trust earned and given was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind. And so the story of valor of Jack, of all those who came and stayed and found their place, lived on. Not in the headlines or the medals or the stone monuments, but in every hand extended, every gate opened, every scar that learned to ache a little less beneath the Texas sky. The work continued. New horses arrived, new veterans needed patience. New children crossed the threshold with old wounds and fragile hope. Each time the answer was the same. We wait. We walk beside them. That is enough. And high on the western hill beneath the spreading oak, the spirit of one old horse, never tamed, never broken, kept watch over them while reminding everyone always that the bravest thing anyone could do was to begin again.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.